That we found out that Herman E. Calloway is his grandpa. Who knows what's gonna happen next?
Yep. All right, we're gonna wait one more second. Everyone needs to be muted, and we're gonna get started. We are on page 214. Okay. Remember, Bud just had those rocks, and Herman was like, "You stole those rocks. You've been looking for them." And Bud's like, "No, they're from my mom." And then they were like, "Who's your mom?" And then he said, "Angela Janet." And then Herman was like, couldn't even speak. He went into the house because Angela Janet was his daughter's name, which would make Herman his grandfather. So, chapter 19. Man, ever since he heard me call my mama's name, Herman E. Calloway had locked himself up in his room and wouldn't come out. Mr. Jimmy and Miss Thomas made me sit at the kitchen table whilst they knocked on his door and tried to talk to him into opening up. But the way they kept saying, "Herman," soft at first, then louder and louder. It sounded like he wasn't talking back. After the longest while, they decided to let the big baby have his own way and came back downstairs. They sat at the kitchen table with me. Miss Thomas looked at me and said, "My, my, my." Mr. Jimmy said, "Now look here, bub." He wiped his hand over his face. "You're sure your mama's name was Angela Janet?" I said, "Yes, sir." "And the two of you both had the same last name. Her name was Caldwell, too. She never said anything about being no Calloway." I spelled it out for him. "No, sir. Her last name was Caldwell. Caldwell. It seemed like he finally believed me and said, "Okay, okay. I hope you don't mind me asking, bud, but it's pretty important that we know how your mama passed. How long ago was it?" Passed was just like gone. It was another one of those words grown folks used instead of dead. I said I was 6 years old when it happened, sir. I don't know why. She was too sick to go to work for 6 days in a row. Then one morning, I went into her room and she was dead. But she didn't suffer or nothing. It happened real quick. She didn't even have time to close her eyes. She didn't look like it hurt or nothing. Miss Thomas reached across the table and touched my arm. She said, "I'm sure it didn't, Bud. I'm sure it was peaceful for her." Remember, at the time, Bud was only 6. It's really hard to understand death, even like your guys' age. But at 6 years old, it's hard to understand death. So he's just explaining it how he remembers it, okay? Like, she just passed away. Then he probably doesn't have the best explanation for it. Mr. Jimmy said, "When was she living, Bud? God rest her soul. What'd your mama look like?" This is another strange question. But before I could answer, Miss Thomas said, "James, what are you instimulating?" I knew there was something familiar about this boy. I didn't know how I missed it before, but look at Bud's eyes. If you ask me, this is Herman's grandchild. Jimmy said, "Hold on now, Grace. I'm just trying to ask the questions I know Herman asked if he could. Ain't a thing wrong with being certain before we jump to any conclusions. Now, what'd she look like, son?" I said she was real pretty, sir. Mr. Jimmy said, "I bet she was, Bud, but that ain't what I meant. Was she short or tall? Was she slim or big boned? I said, "I don't know, sir. She was real pretty. I guess tall and kind of skinny like me, I guess." Miss Thomas said, "James, Bud was 6 years old. Everyone on earth was real tall to him. I don't see the point in all this." I said, "Pardon me, ma'am. I know how I can show you what she looks like. I still got her picture." They just stared at me. I said, "Can I be excused?" Miss Thomas said, "Yes, son. Hurry up and go get that picture." I busted up the stairs, but stopped like I hit a brick wall. I remember how mad and crazy Hermione Calloway looked when he yelled at me. I tiptoed up the rest of the steps. Uh-oh. Hermione Calloway's door was opened up a crack. I held my breath and tiptoed extra quiet, extra fast right into the little dead girl's room. As soon as I did, whoop, zoop, stoop, my heart jumped up into my stomach. Hermione Calloway was sitting on the little chair in front of the little mirror on the dressing table. His elbows were on the table and his face was covered by his hands. It sounded like he was having trouble breathing because every time he sucked in a breath of air, he made a sound, or a sound like, and every time he blew out his air, it sounded like, I didn't know what to do. I could tell Mr. C didn't know I was in the room with him, so I could probably just backward tiptoe and get out without anything happening. I rose up on my toes, 2 baby steps back, and stopped. Shucks. I'd come up here to show Miss Thomas and Mr. Jimmy what my mama looked like. There wasn't nothing wrong with that. I wasn't doing nothing that meant I had to sneak out of this room on my tiptoes going backwards. I sucked in a mouthful of air and walked over to my bed. I picked up my sex case and put it on top of the bed. I pushed the two silver buttons to the side, and the two silver tongues jumped open and made those loud click click sounds. Hermione Calloway still didn't take his face out of his hands. He kept going, "Ma, ma, ma." I reached inside my sex case and took out the envelope with Mama's pictures in it. I closed the silver tongues again and could tell Mr. C wasn't paying no mind to me at all. He kept his face in his hands. His head was rocking up and down real slow, sort of like he was checking to see how much it weighed. I put my sex case back next to the bed and was about to leave the room when I looked over at Hermione Calloway's back. He still didn't know I was in the room with him. I looked in the little round mirror and couldn't see his face, but I could see his hands were a lot better. I could see 6 little trails of water coming out from where his fingers joined with his hands. The 3 trails from each hand joined up together on his wrist and ran down his arms, puddling up on top of the dressing table. Shucks. Herman E. Calloway was bawling his eyes out. He was acting like me being his grandson was the worst news anyone could ever hear in their life. All right, now, let's think. Is Herman crying? Olive, we are on page 218. That's why it's important to be on time, ma'am. Is Herman crying because Bud is his grandson? Why is Herman crying? Molly, you want to unmute yourself and tell us why Herman's crying?
Because his daughter just died.
Right. Herman just found out that his daughter died, like today. You know, Bud has dealt with that for 6 years, and Bud is only 10, and he's like, oh, Herman's upset that I'm his grandson. No, Herman's upset because he just found out his daughter's dead, okay? This was number 39 of Bud Caldwell's Rules and Things to Have a Funner Life and Make a Better Liar Out of Yourself. But Rules and Things, number 39. The older you get, the worse something has to be to make you cry. With babies, it's easy not to pay them no mind because crying's just like talking for babies. A baby's tears might mean, hey, you just stuck a pin in my behind when you changed my diaper. Or their crying might be the way they picked out to say, good morning, Mama, what are we going to do today? That makes it easy not to care about baby's tears. When you got an old person crying, you got a whole nother story. When you got someone as old as Hermione Calloway crying, you better look around because you know you're square in the middle of one of those boiling tragedies. You can't help but feel sorry for him, even if he's been mean to you from the minute he first laid eyes on you, even if he's crying because he found out the two of you were kin. Remember, kin means family. I walked over to Hermione Calloway, and before I could think, my hand moved towards his back. I waited for one of the spaces between the mums and hums, and then touched him. His skin under his shirt was very, very warm. It took a second for Hermione Calloway to know someone was touching him. When he knew, I felt his skin jerk and twitch the same way a horse's does when a fly lands on it. He whipped his head around. When he saw it was me, he jerked away, took one more giant then stared. His mouth started moving like he was talking in a secret language the only way dogs could hear. The last real American words started coming out. At last, real American words started coming out of his mouth. He said, how'd, I'm so, look, buddy, it's Bud, sir, not Buddy. He put his face back in his hands and broke down all over again. Man, it's a good thing that Thug wasn't around, because if he'd heard the way Mr. C was weeping, no one would have wondered who the real Waterworks Willie was. Put my hands back on Mr. C's shoulder and patted him and rubbed him a couple times, then left the room. It felt a lot better going out forward instead of sneaking out backwards. I ran down the steps back into the kitchen. Miss Thomas and Mr. Jimmy's eyes jumped right onto my envelope. I set it in the middle of the table. Both of them looked at it before Miss Thomas reached out to pick it up. She went into the pocket of her little dress and took out some funny little glasses that only had half bottoms on them. Then she put them on her nose. She pulled Mama's picture out and held it far away from her eyes as her arms would stretch. She looked at the picture, looked over her glasses at me, then looked at Mr. Jimmy and said, any more questions for this young man? She slid the picture over to him. Mr. Jimmy picked it up and said, "Well, I'll be. Remember that old coon man who used to drag that runt horse through town? What was his name? Help me out here, Grace. Didn't he used to call it Joe Pegas and his brokeback bronco buck?" Miss Thomas said, "It was Joey Pegas and his brokeback bucking bronco, James. What else do you see in this picture?" Mr. Jimmy said, that is definitely Angela Janet Calloway." He looked at me and said, "You sure this is your mother?" I said, "Yes, sir, but her name's Caldwell, not Calloway." He said, "Well, I'll just be." Miss Thomas butted in on him. "There's little doubt about that, James, but what we've got to do." She kept talking, but I quit listening because something just came out of the blue and gave me a good whoop right on the forehead. Without even thinking about what I was doing, I butted in on Miss Thomas and said, "That means that's not a little dead girl's room I'm sleeping in. That's my mama's room." She looked at me surprised, like this was the first time she thought of that too. She said, "That's right, bud. You're back in your mama's room." I said, "How come Erminie Calloway never called me and my mother? All he'd have to do was call on us one time, and I know she wouldn't have been so sad." Miss Thomas and Mr. Jimmy took turns shooting quick looks at each other and said, "Bud, give me your hand." Uh-oh. Pretty soon I'd have to come up with rules and things when Miss Thomas holds your hand. She stretched her arms across the table. I held onto her fingers. "Bud," she said, "Mr. C, excuse me, your granddad didn't know anything about you. No one knew where your mother had gone." Mr. Jimmy said, "That's right, son. She just up and run off one day. I mean, we all knew Herman was hard on her, but it wasn't like nothing personal. He was hard on everybody. I used to tell him all the time to slack off some on the girl, go easy, but I can remember his exact words said, easy go and easy go don't make the mare run. This is a hard world, especially for a Negro woman. There's 100 million folks out there of every shade of hue, both male and female, who are just dying to be harder on her than I ever could be. She's got to be ready. Shoot." I could see that this girl wasn't the type to. Miss Thomas said, "James, why don't you go up and check on Herman?" She said, "Why don't you?" But it wasn't a question. She's saying, like, "Yeah, Jimmy, roll out," is what she's trying to tell him. Mr. Jimmy said, "Oh, maybe I should," and he left the kitchen. Miss Thomas told me, "But I know you can see your granddad has troubles getting along with folks, right?" "Yes, ma'am. I think it's because he expects so much out of everybody, himself included. And when you set your standards so high, you get let down a lot." I shook my head up and down, acting like I understood. She said, "Now take your mama, for instance. He was so proud of that young woman. He loved her very much. He was determined that she was going to be the first Calloway to get school and all the way through college. So he had to be strict on her, but he went overboard. But simple as that. He used to crow about how his mother and father had been born slaves, and now had only 2 generations later, the Calloways had come so far and worked so hard that one of them was going to be a teacher. It was his dream, not hers. And yet, anyway, and he gave her time. He never gave her time to pick it for herself. The more he pushed, the more she fought him. Finally, it got to be too much. She left. We think she ran off with one of Herman's drummers. We've been hoping for 11 years that she'd send word or come home, and she finally has. Looks to me like she sent us the best word we've had in years. What is Miss Thomas referring to? What word did she send them? Landon, yeah, you're correct. She sent him Bud. Like, they're saying your mom sent you. Obviously, she didn't really send him, but she's saying, your mom sent you the best thing she could have sent. Miss Thomas was probably saying that as an excuse so she could blow her nose and cry. But she came back in a flash. She was holding an iron picture frame and handed it to me. "This has been on my dressing table for 13 years. But ever since your mom was 16 years old, now it belongs to you." I wanted to say thank you, but I just stared at the picture in the heavy iron frame. It was Mama. The picture only showed her head. All around the edge was smoky or foggy, so it looks like Mama's poked her head out of a cloud, and Mama was smiling, the same soft, white smile she'd given me when she'd get home from work. It'd been so long since I'd seen Mama smile. I wanted to cry, laugh, and cry at the same time. Miss Thomas said, "Let me show you something, Bud." She took the frame out of my hands and said, "Watch this." She moved the picture up and down, left and right, and then in circles. Do you see how her eyes are still on you all the time? No matter what way you look at the picture, she's watching. It seemed like Mama was looking direct at me no matter where Miss Thomas put the picture. I can keep this? I feel like I've been holding on to it until the rightful owner came along, and it looks to me like he's finally shown up. What took you so long, child? Miss Thomas patted me underneath my chin. She said, "But, Bud, we've got a problem I'm going to need your help with." Uh-oh. You said you were 6 years old when your mama died? Yes, ma'am. Okay. So that was 4 years ago? Yes, ma'am. You can remember how bad you felt when you first knew she was gone, can't you? Yes, ma'am. Because it still feels the same. Well, you've had 4 years to try and heal that scar, but it still hurts some of the time, doesn't it? Sometimes a lot. I know, Bud, but remember, your grandfather and I just found out she's passed. That hurt is brand new for us. Miss Thomas started swallowing. And even though he hasn't seen her in 11 years, I know there isn't a day that goes by that he doesn't think about her. He'd never admit it, but there isn't one show that we give he doesn't first look out into the audience, not to see how big the crowd is, but hoping that she'll be out there. Hoping she'd seen a flyer tacked to a telephone pole somewhere and would stop by to see him. He loved her so much, Bud. Sorry, sweetheart. She took the hand she wasn't squeezing my fingers with and took a handkerchief out and blew her nose. Those stones he picks up everywhere he performs are for her. She must have been 4 or 5 years old, and the band was getting ready to travel to Chicago for a week. And before he left, he'd ask her what she wanted him to bring back for her. He was thinking a doll or a dress or something, but she told him, "A walk, Daddy. Bring me back a walk from Chicago." So everywhere he went after that, he'd have to get her a walk. He'd write the city and the date they were there on them for her. He's got boxes of them upstairs, 11 years worth. So, Bud, I don't know how Herman's going to be feeling after this. That's where I need your help. You got to remember that both Herman and I love your mama just as much as you do. That didn't seem like it could be true just because it didn't seem like anyone could love my mother as much as I do, and because it didn't seem like Herman E. Calloway could love anyone at all. Miss Thomas said, "So if you can remember, Bud, be patient with him. That ornery old man upstairs is very, very hurt right now, and I just can't say where he's going to land after the news gets through blowing him around." Miss Thomas was starting to get stingy-eyed blinky. "So we're going to have to give him some time. We're going to have to let him find out how he feels before." Mr. Jimmy came into the kitchen. "Grace," he said, "he wants you." Hermione Calloway was making everybody feel like they had the blues. It looked like Mr. Jimmy had wiped some tears from his eyes too. Miss Thomas came around my side of the table and gave me a hug. She said, "You okay?" I said, "Yes, ma'am." She said, Should I go see how he's doing?" "Yes, ma'am." She left the kitchen and Mr. Jimmy went into the living room. I picked up Mama's picture and put it back in the envelope. Mr. C chose a good name for his house, because not a second went by before the back door came open and the dusky devastators of the Depression walked in talking like they were going out of style. As soon as they saw me, they all got quiet. All right, we are going to stop there today. We will finish the book. Wait, maybe we won't stop there today. We got a few more minutes. All right, let me read one more page. Doo Bug said, "Hey, Sleepy LeBone, where's everyone at?" I didn't want to embarrass anyone by saying that all the grown folks were sitting all over the house sobbing their eyes out, so I said, "They're around." I remembered not to call the band, sir. Steady said, "Well, it's you we wanted anyways." He pulled a cardboard suitcase he put a old cardboard suitcase on the table and said, "I told the fellas how hard you've been hitting the recorder and how proud I was of you. So we put a couple nickels together," and acted like he was yelling out into the room. "And Lord knows on peanuts, we get it was a real sacrifice." He slapped some skin with Dirty Deed, then started talking regularly again. "Anyways, the thug saw something at a pawn shop, and we picked it up for you." "Can I open it?" The thug said, "Well, if you don't, I don't know who will." Eddie slid the cardboard suitcase over in front of me. It looked worse than the one I used to carry around. One of the snaps was busted clean off, and the other one was stuck. Steady Eddie said, It's what's inside that's interesting. Just pull the snap real hard. I pulled the snap and it came right off in my head. The thug said, I knew it. The boy's too country. He ain't used to handling fine merchandise. We should have given it to him in a paper bag. So once again, the whatchamacallums, the band members, they're just still joking around. I opened the suitcase, whatever was wrapped in crinkly, wrinkly newspaper. I started pulling newspaper off and could tell that the gift was real heavy. All of a sudden, a shiny piece of gold showed through. I snatched more papers off and couldn't believe my eyes. The dusky, devastated to the depression had put their money together and had bought me a baby-sized horn like Steady Eddie's saxophone. So they bought him an instrument. Steady Eddie could see that I was stuck, so he lifted it out of the suitcase and fished around in the bag for the mouthpiece, the neck, and the reed holder. He stuck the reed for a minute and put the horn together, then played it. Man, my horn sounded great. But he said, it's an alto, bub. There's a little rust in some of the seams, but that's to be expected with a horn that's this old. It's still a good tone to it. This dent didn't throw her off too much. He showed me a big dent on the bottom of my saxophone. I repaddled, refelt it, and restrung it. The rest is up to you. He reached in his pocket and took out a can that said Brasso on the side. Get a rag and shine her up. A man should polish his own horn. I looked at my bandmates and said, thank you. Thank you very, very much. I'll practice on this so much that I'll be as good as you guys in about 3 weeks. Doo-Doo Bug said, oh, now that's cold. I said, really? I will. The band laughed, so I did too. Eddie said, well, Mr. LeBon, I'll tell you what. Since you're so hot to get in this band, I better get you started on lessons right away. He pulled a big silver watch that was tied up to a long chain out of his pocket and said, I'm going by Tyler's for a while now, and I'll be back around 7. If you got your axe polished up by then, I'll bring some sheet music along and we can get started. Sound good? His toothpick jumped with each word. Sounds great, Steady. Eddie took the strap off his neck and handed it to me. I put it on, and Eddie handed me my saxophone for the very first time. It was the perfect weight. Can I be excused? Dirty Deed said. What, you ain't gonna blow us some notes? We want to hear what you got, Mr. 3 weeks from now. I said, I'll let you hear me in 3 weeks, and we're all on stage together. They laughed again, and the thug said, I'm going to let you in on something, Sleepy LeBone. There's certain members of this band that you will be out playing in 3 weeks, but it's going to take you a whole lot longer to top me. On the real tip, it's going to take you at least 10 years before you'll ever be able to hold my drumsticks. Steady Eddie said, yeah. And it's about 9 years and 10 months longer than you'll be with the band, Thug. And the Thug said, oh, man, you ain't going to start this up again. You got to let me know what you heard. I said, can I be excused? Eddie said, go ahead, Sleepy LeBone. I'll be back. I told my bandmates, thank you again. Thank you very much. The Thug said, nothing to it, little man. Dirty Deed said, now, don't let that horn whip you, son. Doo-Doo Bug said, our pleasure, Sleepy. Steady Eddie said, man, get out of here. I picked up both my mama's picture, my horn, and a can of Brasso and ran upstairs. When I got upstairs, I saw that Hermione Calloway's door was still open a crack. Miss Thomas's door was closed now, and I could hear the two of them in her room talking real soft to each other. I could have stood outside the door and listened if I wanted to, but that would have been rude. Besides, I didn't know for sure how long it would take me to polish up my new horn. Okay, now we really are going to stop because we're about out of time. We are going to finish the book tomorrow and play a Kahoot game, a review Kahoot. So I will see you guys tomorrow. I cannot wait to finish the book. Ta-ta. Leave me. Math RTI is starting really soon.
Bye.